to get a job offer at a top tech company like Google, Facebook, or Amazon as a software engineer? If so, you're at the right place. I have a 2 month interview prep plan that if you follow this, you have a very good likelihood of ending up with an offer at one of these companies by the end, or really any company. Um, if you don't know, if you're new to this channel, I'm the Grand Inquisitor, and I make a lot of videos about tech and just other things that interest me. And if you're interested in more videos like this, please follow and like. So before I even go into the details, let's talk a little bit about who I am. I recently, within the last year, got offers at all these top tech companies like Google, Facebook, Stripe, Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, and many others. And, I prepared for only 2 months before them, and I got all these offers. And I did not get rejected from any companies that I applied to and interviewed at. So I'm going to go through what I did and what I recommend others do to prepare for these interviews. So first off, I want to just kind of set some expectations or mindset just going into it, because this isn't, first off, we want to take it seriously. Putting in the effort for 2 months right now is really, really worth it. You can end up making tens of thousands of more dollars than you do now. You can have way better perks than you have, and you can just massively boost your career. And all you have to do is put in a few hours every day, and it'll pay off for the rest of your life. So specifically, I would say you want to do at least an hour a day of prep on weekdays and 2 hours a day on weekends. And if this sounds like a lot, like maybe you're really busy, you have a lot of obligations, then you're not really going to be able to prep in 2 months. I would say you could scale this to work for you. You can scale the plan. If it's going to be 4 months, just divide everything in half. Or if it's going to be 3 months, you can do it by 1.5. Feel free to slow this path down, but this is, in my opinion, like the most aggressive, best way to prepare, and the quickest you're going to get it. So before we go in, also, I want you to be aware that rejection is part of the process. Almost no one gets through life without getting rejected. And the best thing to do when you are interviewing places is to accept as part of the process. Sometimes it's kind of random. You could have prepared you could have prepared perfectly, but just gotten a bad interviewer, a bad question, or something like that. Your interviewer's having a bad day. Just accept it, but also don't make excuses for it. You should be kind of taking in the feedback you got, analyzing what you did wrong, and helping that to make you more prepared for your next interview. Something else I want to talk about is a lot of people have the mindset that it's just about coding, and they'll go on site, they'll ace every coding question, or think they aced every coding question, and then be blindsided when they don't get the offer. And this has happened to me before in my career. The truth is, tech interviews are not just about coding. It's about how you can communicate, how you can express yourself, and it's also about your thought process. If someone asks you a question, you don't say anything, you just code it out. A lot of times that would be considered a failed interview, because you weren't able to get the interviewer to follow along with the process in your mind. And yeah, so just keep in mind it's not just about coding. And finally, I want to really emphasize this last point, which I bolded, which is don't focus too much on hard problems. I see this all the time, and I did this previous years when I interviewed places. Some people will think, hey, I need to just get really good at dynamic programming or something, because they'll see something on the internet about it. But the truth is, these questions are not meant to be that hard. They're meant to be solved in the allotted time, and they're meant to be doable. And, instead of focusing on trying to spend hours doing hard problems on LeetCode, it's much better to get really, really good at the medium problems, because the vast majority of problems you're going to get asked are mediums. And it's better just to ace them and not make small mistakes. So what I did a few years ago when I interviewed for companies, I practiced a lot really hard problems and I got them conceptually. But then when it came interview time, I got some really easy, conceptually easy problems. But then I made all kinds of mistakes when coding them out. Like off by one errors, using like maybe the wrong types, just having stupid bugs where I use the wrong variable on because I'm not thinking properly, or maybe just not explaining myself. So it's really a good thing to get out of that mindset as fast as you can, or never have the mindset of focusing too much on hard problems. The truth is, even let's say Google or Facebook, maybe if you go on site and you have 5 questions, maybe one of them will be hard, and it's okay to usually it's okay to fail that problem. If you do really well on 4 out of 5, then you're gonna get an offer most places, and the chances, like if you spend a lot of time on a hard problem, the chances you're gonna get that exact problem on an interview are pretty low. It's better to spend your time getting good at mediums and getting a wide breadth of problems. So now that I kind of have set these expectations, let's start going into the plan. So, quick outline. The basic prescription is you're spending the first 3 weeks building your fundamentals, just learning basic data structures, stuff like that, and just starting to be able to identify problems. 4 through 6, I would say you should spend mastering medium problems and starting to do more practical preparations, and I'll get into what that means. And then the last 2 weeks of prep, I would say you should only do practical prep and maybe sprinkle in some tougher topics that you didn't have time for in the previous weeks. So also required reading / websites you need to use. So first off is Cracking the Coding Interview. It's a pretty classic book that basically everyone recommends. I think it actually does a really good job. Some people think it's like too easy or something, but frankly, if you can actually master and do everything in that with no help, no tips, and just be able to write bug-free code for every problem in that book, you'll be able to get offers most places. And you can find it on Amazon or wherever. I also have a link for it in the description. Outside of that, I don't think you need any other books, but I recommend using a site, either LeetCode or HackerRank or some other site like similar site that lets you basically has a bunch of programming problems, and it lets you write the solutions, and then it has a bunch of test cases that it'll run. I personally use LeetCode, and when I talk about a problem being easy or hard or medium, I'm usually mean like how LeetCode would rank that problem. And then finally, I actually think this is the most important thing that most people seem to neglect. Like a lot of people when they're studying, they only do the first 2, and I actually think this third one is the most important, which it helped me the most, which was either using Pramp or peer interviews, like in person. And basically what I'm talking about is doing mock interviews, like pretending like you're in a real interview. And just like actually doing real problems, talking about them out loud, explaining them to someone else, and writing them out on a whiteboard or on your laptop. I think that's actually the most important thing. So let's get into the first part, building fundamentals, your week 1 through 3. So the first part is really all about building breadth. There's, what you start to learn once you get good at interviewing is there's only so many types of questions, like maybe a few dozen, and then every other question and just kind of fits into the pattern of one of those. Like, oh, this is a hash map question. This is how you do them, or hey, this is a depth first search. Like questions might have different details, or maybe they'll have slightly different problem statements, but a lot of times you can boil them down to just a few dozen types of problem. So the first goal is you're not going to recognize all these problems or these types of problems, and you just need to see as many as you can and learn how to recognize them and apply the patterns to solve them. And it's important to note at this point, this will change later, but right now you don't want to waste time getting questions perfectly. A lot of times you just may not know the pattern to solve a certain type of problem, And a lot of times it's hard to, if you don't know the pattern, it would be pretty much impossible to figure it out during the interview. But if you had seen it before, it would be really easy. An example of this is there's a famous question finding a loop in a linked list. And the actual solution to it is like an academic paper, and it would be pretty much impossible for someone to independently come up with a solution during the interview. But if you know the solution and you've seen it before, you could do the problem in like 10 minutes. So, it's just sometimes not worth it to waste your time trying to figure those out. It's better, at least at this stage, it's just, if you spend more than 20 minutes on a problem, stop, look at the answer, study why it's right, maybe implement the problem after looking at the answer and try to understand the pattern. But don't get bogged down wasting too much time on a single problem, because you just really want to build the numbers of problems you've seen. So your goal for the first 3 weeks, and this might sound ambitious, is 1, you want to complete cracking the coding interview. And when I say complete, you can skip the medium hard sections. You can come back to them later. And you can also maybe skip some things that you most likely won't get asked depending on your role. Like if you're going for a web development role, maybe you don't need to study that much of you may not need to study much of the binary arithmetic section, because most likely you won't get asked that. I mean, there's always a chance, but it's probably safe to skip. And when I say complete, I mean for each problem, you shouldn't just think of the solution. You should actually write the code for it and then test it and compile it and make sure it actually works. In addition to this, I would say you want to complete 50 LeetCode problems in this time. And that might seem a lot, but honestly, a lot of the easy problems, if you're focusing, like I recommend mostly focus on easy and maybe a few easier medium ones. A lot of them shouldn't take that long. And a lot of it is just going to be about learning the patterns. And like I said earlier, if you spend more than 20 minutes on a problem, stop and look at the answer. Although some easy ones on LeetCode, for whatever reason, are actually difficult randomly and they're kind of mislabeled. But by the end of this time, if you're doing a steady amount of problems each day, let's see, 3 weeks is around 21 days. That's only like 2 to 3 problems a day, which you should definitely be able to do in this time. And by the end of the 3 weeks, you should be actually pretty comfortable. And most easies should just be a walk in the park for you. And you should have a good grasp of all the fundamental data structures and concepts in computer science. I would say I'm not going to break down like the individual data structures you should go through, because cracking the coding interview actually does a pretty good job at it. So on to the second step, weeks 3 through 6, which is all about mastering mediums and practical prep. So the main thing I want to stress, which I think is also a really overlooked point, is that the goal is to practice like you play. So a lot of people only do LeetCode, and they don't ever practice explaining what they're thinking. They don't ever practice under stress. They don't hold themselves accountable for, like I remember when I used to do a lot of LeetCode, if it didn't compile, I would just fix it and then try to do it again and keep trying to do small fixes and then running it again. But in real life, in a real interview, you wouldn't have that ability. So, I think of it like, let's say you have a big basketball championship. Are you only going to ever practice free throws? No, that's not a realistic simulation for actual games. Like, you should be practicing with actual games to get good at the basketball. And just like that, you should be practicing with actual interviews if you want to get good at interviews. LeetCode is not a replacement for interviews. It's just a supplement, or it's just like a additional way to practice, but it's not like an actual substitute. Another thing that you should really focus on in this time is that your code should compile the first time, and it should not have like simple bugs. You shouldn't have off by one errors. You should be trying to fix all those small errors that people tend to make. And a lot of people think those aren't important, but they really are, especially when they add up. Like a lot of times, even small things like not knowing different APIs in your language, etc. 1 or 2 of those mistakes won't kill you, but some people end up having 5 or 6 of those same types of mistakes when doing a problem. And when it adds up like that, you definitely will fail your interview. Like, you can't be having off by one error and not knowing the string APIs and not knowing how to do, like array operations, like all this stuff. You want to work out all these kinks so that when you're in a real interview setting, you're not focused on, how do I do this again? Everything should just be automatic, and you should really be focused on the logic of the problem. And at this point also, I would say you should start giving yourself 40 minutes per problem, maybe a little less, because in a real interview setting, you can't just give up on the problem after 20 minutes, right? You either have a solution or you don't. And in real interviews also, it's better to have a non-optimal solution than no solution. So, if all you can think of is like a high complexity runtime solution, maybe it's better to just implement it anyway instead of having no solution. So main 2 things to focus on this stage is so continue to do leak code, but only do medium problems. Especially, you want to focus on graph problems. Those are the most common type of problem I see at every company. Like, I've never had a full on-site day without having at least one graph problem. And then when you're doing leak code now, I want you to be talking out loud as you go and explaining what you're doing, just like it was a real interview. And then you should also be timing yourself like a real interview. And finally, once again, like a real interview, you should be running through the code line by line before you hit run. Because if you've ever been in a real interview situation, a lot of times, especially if it's a whiteboard, you're never going to run it. And at some point, you just have to tell the person you're done. And if you find the solution, if you find an error after that and you don't properly double check your code, that's a big problem. Like, you need to get used to going line by line through, running through little test cases yourself and finding any errors you might have. And then number 2, which I mentioned earlier, is actually the most important thing, I think, that helped me the most, was using Pramp. I did every single problem on Pramp.com, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I just think it's a really helpful service. An alternative would be just getting a friend and doing mock interviews with them. And this is all about getting the closest thing to a real interview environment you're going to get outside of a real interview. Even though it's like the stakes are lower, you still have someone judging you. You'll still have that pressure. You'll still be more aware of the small mistakes you make, and you won't have. There's someone, essentially, since there's someone judging you, you can't let yourself off easy. And I think it's really, really important and a really, really good resource to use. In fact, if I had to give if you're restricted to one form of interview prep, I would say just do Pramp. But a lot of people are scared to do it or won't do it because they have to interact with other people. So weeks 7 through 8, this is the final 2 weeks before, let's say, your interview. At this point, you should have a good grasp of medium problems. You should have good grasp of all the different types of problems, and you should just be trying to tune up and really just get prepared for the real interview. At this point, I would not focus as much as on LeetCode. I would be really focusing mostly on Pramp, at least doing 1 or 2 a night. And this is really just to work out any kinks you have in your interview style and how you interview. Once again, you're trying to practice for the real thing. You're not trying to use LeetCode as a substitution for the real thing. Number 2, if you're going to do LeetCode at this time, only do it on the paper or a whiteboard. So you should be doing medium problems still, but write them out. And then when you're done, and you should be talking out loud when you do it as well. And when you're done, take what you wrote on the whiteboard, type it in character for character into your computer, run it, and it should pass all the tests and be smooth as butter. Like, you shouldn't have issues. And then finally, this is only if you have time after the other 2. it's like you can start to look into some of these harder concepts. So what I mean by harder concepts is something like dynamic programming. But once again, don't make it your main focus, and tackle the medium to hard questions in cracking the coding interview as well. And so something like these hard problems, these hard concepts, like I said earlier, there is a chance you'll get asked them, but most people don't get the offer because they missed some hard problem. They don't get the offer because they made easy mistakes on other problems. Like I guarantee, if 4 out of 5 interviews you ace and they're all mediums, the one out of 5 that was a hard problem, no one else passed either, and you could still definitely get an offer. Only times when hard problems end up, people don't get offers with not getting a hard problem is when they also did poorly in some other interview. So now we finally approach the last few days before your interview. At this point, my main recommendation is just try to relax. It's probably too late to really learn any new concepts. And if you try too hard at this point, you're just going to feel burnt out and stressed and not do as well as you could. I would, still do some problems to keep your practice up, but don't overwork or overstress. You want to come in fresh to your interviews. And, if you're lucky enough to have a bunch of interviews, I would also recommend lining up some practice interviews at companies you may not care as much about. This gives you a backup, and if you don't get offers that you really want, and also gives you practice, obviously, in a real interview environment. And then finally, worst case, you can use it as leverage. If you get an offer there, you can use it as leverage for a higher salary at the company you do want. Anyway, that's all I have. Best of luck to anyone who's trying to get a job offer. I know it can be tough, and hopefully you get everything you like. And if you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, all the usual. Thank you.